This is the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys, and the prosecutors are present as well. Before we bring the jury in, just a couple of housekeeping matters. The first is that I realize that I skipped number 8 in terms of the juror questions. And so, just so that the record is clear, that's not an indication that that question is lost or that question form is lost. I just skipped a number in numbering the question forms. I went from 7 to 9. So, there is a motion filed by the media petitioners, and I don't know whether the parties have received it or not, but it is requesting access to all non-graphic image exhibits that have been admitted into evidence and displayed in open court whose contents are not visible to the public outside Courtroom 201. And as far as I can tell, it refers to the diagrams that have been admitted, which are not visible on the camera, on the closed-circuit TV camera. So I think it's a fair request, but I wanted to run it by counsel first. What I would be inclined to do is to simply scan those and provide them to the media through our public relations representative, Mr. McCollum. But I wanted to run it by the parties first to see if the parties had any position on that. I don't know whether you've had a chance to review the motion yet or not. Mr. Orman, do the people have a position on that? Yes. Okay. Does the defense have any position on that? Yes, and for the record, it's exhibits 1129, 1145, 1147, 1154, 1167, and 1168, and they're all diagrams. Is that correct, Ms. Gerlings? Yeah, I think they're all diagrams. If they're not, I'll let you folks know. But if they are, I don't have any concerns about providing them, scanned copies of them to the media petitioners. Mr. King?
I've just had a chance to very briefly read the pleading. Do we have until tomorrow morning to really read it and take a position?
That's fine. And to the extent that it's wider in scope than that, I'm not inclined to provide anything beyond that. I think it's fair to ask for exhibits that have been admitted that are not clearly visible on camera. But I think beyond that, for example, to the extent that it seeks exhibits that were used in opening statements, those are not admitted yet, and I am not inclined to provide those.
And that was where my question came from, because it appeared in the photographs that were attached that it was the opening statement exhibits that were being shown. It was during Mr. Brockler's opening statement, if I recall correctly, and there were some of his PowerPoint slides that you could see on the screen, but you couldn't read them.
That may be, but the motion itself, the title is, it's a motion for access to non-graphic image exhibits that have been admitted into evidence and displayed in open court. So if that's the request, I think it's a fair request, and I don't have any concerns over it. But if you still want until tomorrow morning to think about it, I will allow that.
Yes, please.
Okay, that request is granted. Just a couple of other things. I know that there have been quite a few objections to questions related to injuries. I have overruled most of them because I think that the extent, character, and nature of the injuries is relevant. I think that's probative of the injuries that were suffered by the named victims, allegedly suffered by the named victims as a result of the shooting that took place. And so I think that the people are entitled to present evidence of the character, the nature, and the extent of the injuries suffered. That includes if someone had to have surgery. That includes if somebody needed to have a recovery period. Of course, it has to be within reason. I mean, it can't go too far beyond that, and I think I've been pretty good about making sure that it doesn't go beyond that, and I don't think that the people have attempted to go too far beyond that. I think they've introduced evidence in terms of wounds and injuries and surgeries and medical treatment that was necessary as a result of those injuries, and so that's why I have overruled those objections. When Mr. Nolan was testifying, there was an objection during one of the juror questions by Mr. King related to an inference that he drew from his observations. And the witness had made that statement, I think in response to the previous question from the jury. There was no objection at that point, but then there was an objection when he mentioned it again the second time, again in response to questions from the jury. And at that point, all I said was, well, the witness has answered the question. Let me now clarify the record. I think it is a reasonable inference for an observer to draw, given all the circumstances present and given all the circumstances that he testified about. I think it's reasonable for him to make that inference. I think it may well be the most reasonable inference for somebody to make, given what he said. And given the observations he made, which he testified about, and in addition demonstrated here in court, we're talking about someone who observed that an individual came into a dark theater, and he testified that the individual was shooting people who were sitting in the theater while in the dark, and that he himself was hit during the shooting a couple of times. And he was able to see the shooter at one point, and what he observed was that the shooter had what appeared to be a rifle in his hands, and that he appeared to be looking for more victims. And then he demonstrated what he meant by that. He demonstrated what observations he made. I think that given all the circumstances and observations, that's a reasonable inference. And so I don't need to take any further action in terms of the testimony because he answered the question anyway, and I didn't rule one way or another on the objection. But I wanted to make that record clear. At the bench, I did agree with Mr. King that part of the second question from the jury with respect to that witness should be modified. And I think that question included something like whether the witness thought that the defendant was trying to maximize the number of victims. And there was something about the word maximize, or the term maximize the number of victims that bothered me. And so I modified the question. I took that part of the question out. And I think there's a difference between allowing somebody to say whether the shooter was trying to maximize the number of victims versus allowing somebody to say whether he thought, based on his observations, that the shooter was trying to find more victims. And so I think the latter is fine. The former, I think an argument can be made that calls for speculation, and so that's why I ended up modifying the question. So I wanted to explain that to you, okay? All right, are you ready for the jury, Ms. Nelson?
Your Honor, I do have two brief matters to
Yes.
the jury. And then the first pertains to the first record that the court made with respect to testimony of victims about the nature and extent of their injuries and subsequent medical treatment. And before over the lunch hour, the defense reached the conclusion that we feel it's necessary to make a formal oral motion in limine to exclude testimony about subsequent medical procedures and care that the victims have received. Detailed and lengthy testimony about the nature and extent of their injuries. We understand that brief testimony about the may be relevant to the attempted murder counts. Serious bodily injury, as the court knows, is not an element of attempted murder. descriptions of their subsequent medical treatment and so forth is therefore not relevant to the charges in this case and is not relevant to any stage issue at any stage of these proceedings. Any minor probative, our position is that any minor probative value that this evidence may have is outweighed by the danger of unfair cause. Or anything about these. As well as Mr. Holmes's right under the 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments of the United States. Find any authority over the lunch hour from Colorado in support of this argument. However, I think distinction between the nature of the injuries, ongoing treatment, and condition of present condition of victim. State versus Hatch at 425 Northwest 2nd, 27, and the pin site, the portion of the case in which this is pages 30 to 32, and that's a
Okay, thank you. I haven't read that case yet. Do the people want to respond?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, first of all, the prosecution would contest that it's not an issue, that we still have to prove that there are 140 counts of attempted murder in this case. There's no stipulation in place. We are still responsible for proving each and every element of this case beyond a reasonable doubt to this jury, which we spent extensive time for 3 months explaining to all of these jurors during individual voir dire. Additionally, Your Honor, the people do have authority for the court. People v. Medina, which is 51 P. 3rd 1006, it's a Colorado appellate case from 2001, which basically it says not only are, descriptions of injuries admissible in cases like this, but also photographs of those injuries. Further, Hinton, and that's Hinton v. People, which is 458 P. 2nd 611, and that's a Colorado Supreme Court case from 1969. And also Martinez v. People, 235 P. 2nd 810, which is a Colorado Supreme Court case from 1951. And I also have additional authority from some federal district court cases, Alabama and North Carolina, which the court probably doesn't want at this time, but I have that as well if the court would be interested.
Sure, why don't you give them to me?
Thank you. It's James v. Culliver, that's Culliver. That's a 2014 United States District Court case from the United States District of the Northern District of Alabama, 2014. And then Scroggin, which is Scroggin v. State, which is 529 South 2nd, 1025, which is an Alabama criminal appellate court case from 1988. And then also State v. Siriana, which is Syriani, 428 Southeast 2nd, 118, which is a North Carolina case from 1993. And I have an outline of those cases if the court would like a copy. Thank you, Your Honor.
What's the site for the James case?
I have a Lexis citation, Your Honor, for that, which is 139696, since it's such a recent case. And I can provide the court with a Westlaw site tomorrow, Your Honor, on that, or perhaps on a break.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Hold on just a second. It sounds to me like there is no disagreement that evidence related to the nature, the character, and extent of the injuries is admissible. And the only question is how far that goes. The defense, I think, is arguing that some testimony related to that brief testimony is admissible, but if you go too far, then the prejudicial effect of that evidence can outweigh the probative value. I have been making rulings based on the understanding that the probative value of the evidence was not substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. And so what Ms. Nelson specifically was arguing is that evidence related to current condition and things to that effect, whether some was a current, what else did you say in addition to current condition?
Subsequent medical treatment as well, Your Honor.
Subsequent medical treatment, those two items, that goes too far or goes beyond what is allowed by law.
And Your Honor, I would say that the defendant is alleged to be the proximate cause of all of those injuries. There's no intervening causes whatsoever. And I frankly think it's offensive that if people are paralyzed as a result of their injuries, that they need constant daily care up until this point. And I think that the people should be able to discuss the extent of those injuries to the jury. This is a case where we've charged extreme indifference, attempted murder, and I think there were many instances because of subsequent surgeries where those victims were still in danger of dying. And I think it's appropriate. And, if those were the facts with just one attempted murder victim, certainly the court would permit, that evidence. And, I think the people will try to be reasonable and prudent regarding the evidence we present. But it's what the court said. When you have a crime of this magnitude, there's going to be information that's prejudicial to the defendant's case, but it's not unfairly prejudicial.
And many of the counts are attempted murder after deliberation and with intent. In other words, that the defendant attempted to commit the crime of first-degree murder after deliberation and with intent to cause the death of another person. That's what that crime alleges, and that crime is charged with respect to numerous victims in this case. And so, again, I think the extent of the injuries and the nature and character of the injuries doesn't just go to the result of the alleged shooting, but it goes to elements of the offenses charged. And I don't think it's fair to say, well, you can ask the person what they felt that in the moment or what they observed in the moment of the shooting. I think that the extent of the injury encompasses that what was necessary in terms of medical intervention to address that injury. I think that goes directly to the extent of the injury. It's one thing to say, well, I looked at my arm and my arm had appeared to have blood on it and blood was coming out of my arm. It's another thing to say, I looked at my arm and it had blood on it, and then I was taken to the hospital and it turned out that I had a broken bone and I had to have surgery. In fact, I had to have 5 surgeries. And they had to insert a rod in there, a plate first, and then after they took out the plate, and then they inserted a rod after that. And even now, I have limited mobility in my arm, or even now I still have to do physical therapy. That all goes to the extent of the injury, and that's why I have allowed the questions that I have allowed, even if there have been some objections. As Ms. Tisch-McGuire said, though, the people have to be prudent and careful in how they proceed so that they don't go too far. And what the law worries about is that proper purpose, and that you are, that the evidence, even if that's not your intent, will be so prejudicial that whatever probative value the evidence has will be substantially outweighed by that danger of unfair prejudice. And so far, I haven't seen that with respect to any of the questions that have been asked that I have overruled objections on. But that has to, the people have to be careful how they proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Nelson, you say you had 2 things. What's the second thing?
The second is an oral motion in limine to preclude going forward questions. We've seen this now several times posed to victims concerning their military service and experience and how that relates to their ability to recognize the sounds of gunfire and the types of weapons that were fired in the theater. Your Honor, at this point, it's been established that firearms were fired in the theater that night. Several witnesses have described this in detail, and again, there's no dispute about whether firearms were discharged in the theater or which firearms were discharged in the theater. At this point, the probative value of continuing to ask victims about this is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice and is also cumulative. And our concern is that it's improperly bolstering the character and credibility of the witnesses and is an attempt to be ingratiating in some respect to the jury. And again, I would say Colorado Rule of Evidence 401, 403, Mr. Holmes' rights to due process, his right to a fair trial and reliable sentencing proceeding, as well as the 5th, 6th, 8th and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, Colorado Constitution, Article 2, Sections 16, 20, 23, and 25.
Any response?
I don't know what it means that they're not disputing anything. If they don't want to dispute, they can plead guilty. Otherwise, everything is in dispute, and we've got to plead everything. This thing that they're not disputing everything, I've never heard of a case discussing this. I've never heard of a legal doctrine in jurisprudence that ever I've read since law school that talks about this. We have to prove our case. And we have to prove our case the way we think it is appropriate, not the way that defendants' attorneys think is appropriate. So I don't even know what that means. But, Your Honor, first of all, it's proper lay opinion to talk about the types of gunshots you hear. And the background of a witness is an essential fact for the jury to have in determining credibility. I'm sure the defendant would like it if we put up witnesses and just said, tell us what you saw, where the jury would have no idea what the witness's background is, or what their education is, or what their job is. We've heard objections to what their job is. But I would ask the court to consider the instruction that we give jurors on credibility. What the jurors are supposed to consider on credibility, to consider a witness's knowledge, motive, state of mind, demeanor, manner while on the stand, means of knowledge, ability to observe, and so forth. The background of a witness, what their job is, how old they are, what their education is, where they're from, all of this should go into the juror's determination of credibility. If they're in the military, that is, or formerly in the military, if they're a police officer, formerly a police officer, if they've heard guns go off before and know what it sounds like, that's all something jurors should be able to take into consideration. I do have a few cases that I would like to cite to the court on this point. There's a Colorado case that is not exactly on point, and it's really old, Your Honor. I'm almost embarrassed citing this, but it's what I could find in Colorado. It's from 1903. But we were still the state of Colorado back then. It's not a territorial case. United Oil versus Miller, 73 Pacific, not second or third, Pacific, 627, Court of Appeals, 1903. I would also cite to the court some out-of-state cases. One is McDaniel versus the Commonwealth, 415 Southwest 3rd, 643, and the pinpoint site is 654, and that's from Kentucky, 2013. That's actually about a physician, Your Honor, and in that case, the criminal defendant argued that because the physician was testifying as a lay witness, the prosecution should not have been allowed to ask the physician about his qualifications. And rejecting that argument, the Kentucky Supreme Court said, quote, appellant does not cite any cases holding that a lay witness may not answer questions about his background. Obviously, background information is relevant to jurors in that it aids in assessing the credibility of fact witnesses and determining the weight to give their testimony. Questions within the unique province of the jury. I would also cite to Lamb, like a little lamb, versus York, 247 Northeast 2nd, 197. Pinpoint site is 202 from Indiana in 1969 for a similar holding, Your Honor. So I think that the argument from counsel for the defendant is completely without merit and should be rejected.
All right. Ms. Nelson?
And, Your Honor, I would just ask for an opportunity. Obviously, I've not had the chance to review the cases that were just cited by the prosecution. So first, I'd just like an opportunity to review them, and if there's anything I need to respond to, I'd ask for an opportunity to do that in the morning. And secondly, I do think it is relevant that we are not disputing some of these issues when the court conducts its 401, 403 analysis, and whether this evidence is cumulative or whether the probative value is substantially outweighed by its prejudicial effect. I think that's a relevant thing for the court to consider when making the 403, 401 analysis.
I agree. I have to rule now because we have witnesses who are going to testify here in just a moment, and so the motion is denied. I agree with Mr. Orman. The prosecution has the burden of proof in this case. It is the only party with the burden of proof, and even if the defense is willing to stipulate to certain aspects of the charges, the prosecution is not required to accept that offer. The prosecution is entitled to present its case however it wants. as long as it follows the rules of evidence. And there is nothing improper about asking the types of questions that are the subject of the motion in limine. I have allowed brief background questions, very brief, and I've allowed them especially when they go to a reason or an aspect of the story. For example, to explain why someone went to the theater that night, or to explain why someone went with a particular individual to the theater that night. And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking a witness not only to state their name, but to say, what do you do for a living? I do think that that goes to credibility. That doesn't mean that it's bolstering credibility. It's general information about the background of the witness, and the jury is entitled to consider that information in making credibility determinations. I haven't allowed extensive questioning about that. My recollection is that I've allowed a one question type of proposition, one or two, with respect to some witnesses. And with respect to most of those witnesses, the questions have had something to do with the story or something to do with their testimony. In other words, why they ended up at the theater that night, why they ended up going to the theater with the people that they went to the theater with. In terms of military background, I disagree that that's so prejudicial that it substantially outweighs any probative value of the evidence. Number one, to the extent I've allowed it, I believe I've allowed it for the most part because it goes to part of the testimony. Some of the witnesses who have testified have talked about how, as they were making observations during the shooting and they were listening to the sounds, they could tell certain things. Well, the question is, how could you tell that? Why were you thinking that at the time? Why were you experiencing that at the time that the shooting was unfolding? Well, the answer is because I have military background, and in the military I learned the sound of weapons, or I learned the sound of this particular weapon, or I learned about the smell of shotgun or shotgun fire. Those are relevant. They have to be allowed to explain to the jury what they experienced. And in explaining what they experienced, that includes what they saw, what they heard, what they smelled, what actions they took, what actions they didn't take, and why. And the why goes to their background. And to the extent that anyone has testified about military background, I believe that it's been connected to their experience during the shooting, their observations during the shooting. So, but even if someone, just by way of background, says that that's what they do for a living, I don't see that as inadmissible or improper in any way. It's not prejudicial, much less so prejudicial that it substantially outweighs the probative value of the answer, which goes to credibility. So for all those reasons, the motion in limine, the second motion in limine, like the first motion in limine, is denied. I will follow up and read these cases anyway, and if I change my mind, I'll let you know. And then, Ms. Nelson, you can read the cases as well, and if you want to supplement the record at any time, of course, I'll give you an opportunity to do that. All right, let's bring the jury in, please. The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Please be seated, everyone. Welcome back, members of the jury. I hope you had a good lunch. Thank you for your patience. I've mentioned before that sometimes I have to have discussions with the lawyers outside your presence about administrative things or legal things that the law requires us to talk about without you being here and without you hearing us. But I very much appreciate your patience. Let's have the prosecution call their next witness at this time, please. Mr. Brockler.
Thank you, Your Honor. Burt Pereira, please.
Right here. Can I have you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. All right, please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names.
Burt Andrew Pereira. First name Burt, B-E-R-T. Last name H-E-R-R-E-R-A.
Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, would you, and look, I know you're in a uniform and you have a badge, but I see no gun and I see no handcuffs. What do you do for a living?
I'm a fire medic for the city of Aurora.
How long have you been doing that?
For the city of Aurora for 9 years.
Did you provide emergency medical treatment and services back on July the 20th, 2012?
Yes, I did.
So if we're going to talk about that, I want to ask you, before you became a firefighter for Aurora, do you have any other emergency medical experience?
Yes, I was an EMT prior to that. I worked as a health and safety officer for a water well drilling company, which is my ex-father-in-law. So I was a medic out in the field, as well as wrote the health and safety plans. And then I worked for Unical and Parachute as an underground miner, and I was on the rescue team for them as well.
The rescue team for the miners?
Yes.
Okay. You have a specific kind of schedule as a firefighter, yes?
Correct.
Now, my understanding is it's like 1 day on, 1 week off, or something like that. Is that?
I wish.
What is it
wish.
really?
We work 3 24-hour shifts. So we work 72 hours a week. We work 24 on, then we're off the following day, 24 on, we're off the following day, 24 on, and then we're off for 4 days.
What time of day does the shift stop and start?
8 a.m. to 8 a.m.
So did you then start on 8 a.m. the 19th of July?
Correct.
All right. Now, tell us, just prior to the call that you received out to the Century 16 or Cinemark theaters, what were you doing?
Well, we were very busy that day. We were out running calls. We heard the dispatch come out and dispatched Engine 8. It came in just as a general shooting. They only thought there was a few victims. And then as they found more, PD was requesting more fire, more rescue. And as they found more people, they were dispatching more units, and I was dispatched on the second alarm.
So you say it was a call out to a shooting. In the 9 years that you've been in Aurora, have you been dispatched to a shooting before?
Many.
Always in Adams County, though.
Yes.
I'm kidding. How many shootings do you think you have been out to provide emergency medical training or services?
I can't even count. There's been many, many.
Now, the way the fire department is set up, you're not stationed like right next to the theater. Is that fair?
Yes.
Tell us how you guys are dispersed out and how you ended up getting summoned to a place that's not right next door to you.
Well, Engine 8 is the first due engine there, so they're the closest to that location. It's all based on the number of households, the number of fire hydrants, how spread out the fire departments are, the firehouses. They basically, per your location, they'll dispatch one engine, which is the first due, and then they'll have second due, third due, and it's all based on our CAD system, which is a computer-aided system. And as the request comes out, the computer generates that for the dispatchers, and then they'll send out rigs.
Based on the location of where the Century 16 Theater is, where are you in that call-out order?
We were second due, so they dispatched us as well as Engine 5 basically at the same time. They are a little further east than we are, but about the same distance north from the theaters.
Now, you said you have been dispatched out to shootings. sadly, not infrequently in Aurora. Was there anything unusual about this particular call-out that sticks out in your mind?
There's a lot. I mean, PD kept requesting, we just kept hearing them repeat, we need rescue, we need rescue. And, we can only get there as fast as we can get there because they kept finding more and more victims. So we were hurrying as fast as we could, license sirens as usual. But upon arrival, there's just police everywhere. It's hard to get into the scene. We were having to weave back and forth through the parking lot. We came in on the north side. There were so many police cars actually that my officer told the engineer to push them out of the way if need be. We didn't go that far. We wove in as far as we could. We grabbed our gear and we were assigned to Engine 8, which was stationed on the north side of the theater, and I was assigned patient care.
A couple things to back up. First off, when you get the call out, are you hearing the police call out and ask for rescue?
Yes.
Now, in a typical shooting situation, what's the tone of voice of those guys?
Usually it's pretty calm, unless there's something very, very serious.
Yes, sir?
Yes, you may do so.
How about 4739?
That one's been previously admitted as well, right, Mr. Brockler?
Yes, I'm seeing smart people nod. How about 4741? And that one has been admitted as well. All right, sir, if you could, with the court's permission, there is this Phil Donahue microphone thing we have going on there.
Right there.
And can you use our PowerPoint 83 right there to...
Did you
Yep.
say Phil Donahue? That's so 1990s.
I know that dates me, but...
Right.
Sir, would you please stand up and make sure that microphone's on? Okay, and would you talk us through how and forgive me, I should ask this before. Were you in a fire truck?
Yes.
And where do you sit in the fire truck, and what's your assigned duty on it?
I sit backwards. I sit right behind the engineer, so it'd be, the driver of the engine, and I'm the primary medic on the engine.
Okay, so talk us through where you guys went to when you first got on scene.
Okay, like I say, we came in from the north side. So here's the mall here. The entrance that we came through was right here. We wove our way down through this road here. And like I say, it was just littered with police cars because they had just parked wherever they could. They said there was an active shooter, so they were everywhere. We came in this way. We stopped actually about a little past the Center Point Drive here. We got out of the rig. We walked down this far, and then there's an island right here, and Engine 8 was parked right here. And I was assigned patient care from that point on. There was a lot of shooting victims that were seated there, and we're just waiting for someone to come and assist them.
Now, and is the theater this thing on the...
This is the theater here.
Okay. Let me just describe what I think you've pointed to, and you correct me if I'm wrong, just for the record, okay? You came in at the upper right-hand corner area of this exhibit 4741 and came around the right side of what looks to be the giant mall there, and you worked your way down to sort of the northwestish corner of the theater. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Tell us what happened then.
So from this point on, we brought our bags over. Our crew split, my officer and the other EMT that was on the rig with me. They went around to the opposite side of the building. We stayed here for patient care. From that point, I started treating and getting people loaded up into ambulances and going. I treated approximately 7 people. The first one was an Asian male. He had 2 gunshot wounds, one to his knee, one to his buttock. I got him an IV established, gave him some oxygen, put him on a backboard, and as soon as we could get ambulances into the area, we started loading and getting them going, because ultimately they needed hospital care versus us treating them in the field. Again, the hard part was with all the police cars, we were unable to get ambulances there, and soon as they figured that out, we had them coming in pretty regular, and we were just getting people loaded and going.
How would you describe the situation?
The situation was kind of eerie, in my opinion. On a scenario like this, you would expect people to be screaming, yelling, just, a chaotic scene. Everybody seemed to be in shock. They were walking towards us kind of zombie-like. It was actually very amazing because there were people that were shot that were not wanting treatment. They were saying, this person here is worse off than I am, treat them first. In that situation, I can't dedicate all my time to one person anyway. Like I say, the best thing to do is get them loaded into the ambulance and go into the hospital. So basically, that's what as crew members, that's what we were doing. We were getting them bandaged up as quick as we could, IVs established if they lost blood, and shipped out to the hospital as quick as we could.
Before I have you sit down, sir, I want to ask you, did you move your location and the treatment that you provided from this area that you've already indicated with our stick?
We stayed here the entire time. After I had treated 5 of the patients, they were going to have us go in and pronounce those that were in the theater.
Pronounce them what?
Pronounce them dead. But the officer off the truck, as well as the medic there, had already been inside, and they assured the chief on scene that they had already assessed them and that they were indeed dead. So then they stood us down. They told us there was a possibility of explosives. They stayed just on the north side of the engine there. So we basically used the engine as a shield until they determined that there weren't any explosives. And at that point, we got everybody out of there within 40 minutes, which is pretty amazing for the number of people that we had. And they released us, and we went back in service.
Since we're not going to use this anymore, you can do me a favor and turn off the... Yes, thank you, sir. And thank you. Now, is the level of treatment and care that you provide tied in some way to the, I guess, the number of victims that you have to care for at any given scene?
Yeah, as I stated earlier, when we have that many victims, the best we can do is treat and triage and get going the patients that we have. If it's an individual, if it's a 1 or 2 patient scene that have been shot, I can dedicate more time to them, making sure that, they're assessed better. I do more of a detailed head-to-toe treatment. I make sure that they have IVs established because inevitably when you get to the hospital, they have to give them blood. So, I try to get all that going, but since we were so close to the hospitals, I basically loaded them and got them going to the hospital.
And when you say loaded them, onto what?
To prams, which are the beds that the ambulances have.
Okay. You had said that there was, the call as you were getting there was that there was still an active shooter.
That's what we were told.
Did that affect where you went and the treatment that you gave?
No. When we arrived on scene, there was, police officers everywhere, and the only thought that went through my mind is, hopefully they'll get them before they get us.
Right. At the time that you're there, is it your practice to try to, in a different situation, to document who you've treated and how you've treated them and their injuries?
Yes, it is.
Were you able to do that here?
No.
Is that
No,
just a function of the volume?
Yeah. When we have a mass casualty incident like this, again, our first priority is get them to the hospital, get them taken care of. When it's more of an individual type call, I get all their history, all that stuff, and I write a report on it. And basically on this, all I did is document what I did for different patients. Couldn't get their names, any of that stuff. I just basically loaded them and got them going to the ER.
Is it fair to say that to this day you don't know the identities of the people that you ended up helping?
That's correct.
Look, you said you saw 7 total, is that right?
That's correct.
Did each of them have what you consider to be life-threatening injuries?
It's hard to tell. Anytime you're shot,
I'm sorry, sir. I'm going to object at this point and for injuries without kind of being able to relate it to any specific people and specific people aren't going to talk about that.
Well, the rule?
Go ahead, sir.
whenever there's a gunshot wound, it's hard to tell whether it's life-threatening or not, because you don't know the direction that the bullet takes, whether it ricochets off a bone. You just never know. So anytime we do have gunshot victims, we always use the highest level of care. We always take them in emergent to the hospital because the doctors are the ones that are going to figure that out.
As best you can recall, sir, would you talk us through what injuries you recall for the 7 cases that you had, even if they're not in order?
Yeah, like I say, the first male had a gunshot wound to the buttock as well as his knee. I treated a female that had a gunshot wound to her buttock as well. I treated a male that had a gunshot wound through his right shoulder, and that one had an entry and an exit wound. I treated a gentleman who had looked like a grazing from a bullet on his lower back. Just basically covered that and transported him.
What does that mean in grazing?
Meaning that the bullet did not penetrate his torso. It just rubbed the skin basically and caused an open wound.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Let's see, I transported 2 that had what appeared to be shotgun injuries. They had pellets as well as lumps all over their bodies, their face, their arms. Those 2 walked up to me towards the end. They were still bringing people out of the backside, and they walked up to me in a zombie state, and we transported them.
A couple things about that. When you were describing that, you brought your hands up to your face and flared out your fingers pointing to your face. What were you trying to show when you did that?
Well, a shotgun, when a shotgun is used, you have, pellets that come out, so it's more of a pattern of a spread out pattern where you have multiple injuries all over the face, the arms, torso.
And both of these folks had that?
Yes.
When you say zombie-like, what do you mean by that term?
I mean that they were just had blank stares and were just walking towards me, really not making any noise. The final person I treated, the female, she was crying a little bit once I started talking to her and just said that she needed help. Other than that, everybody was pretty quiet. It was pretty eerie.
Any others that you can recall, sir?
Not that I can recollect.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
What am I leaving out for this? Thank you, sir. Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Higgs, do you have any questions for this witness?
No, thank you, sir. I have no questions for you.
Okay.
All right, there appears to be a question from the jury. Could counsel please approach? Sir, the jury has submitted a question which, based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, I have found to be appropriate. The question is, where are you stationed?
I'm at Station 2, which is located.
Thank you.
You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, Your Honor.
All right, please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names.
My name is Officer Chris Nyman. It's CHRISNEIMAN.
Mr. Brockler?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, your flashlight may have gone off or something. There's something that was...
Oh, it's good now.
Okay, good. Sir, would you please tell us what you do for a living?
I'm a police officer with the City of Aurora.
How long you been doing that?
12 years.
Did you have any law enforcement experience prior to those 12 years?
No.
Do you work a particular shift or beat for Aurora?
I work District 1 on the graveyard shift.
That's a very pleasant name. What hours do you keep for that?
I work from 10 p.m. till 8 in the morning.
What was the first time?
10 p.m. till 8 in the morning.
Okay, and it's 24 on, 24 off for you too?
I work 410s.
4/10, okay. Were you working on July the 19th and July 20th, 2012?
Yes.
What was your assignment at that time?
I was on patrol in District 1 on graveyards.
Now, District 1, describe what that covers for us.
District 1 is everything in Aurora west of I-225.
Is it routine for you to be called out at an incident that would occur, let's say, at the Century 16 Theater?
Yes.
And you've been there before on different call-outs?
Excuse me, I guess you could ask the question again.
Have you been out there before on call-outs for various things?
Yes.
Have you been called out before in your 12 years on shootings, gunshot victims, that kind of stuff?
Yes.
On this particular early morning hours of 2012, July 20th, 2012, describe for us what kind of call you received.
Dispatch aired that there was a shooting at the Century 16 Theater, and they said that there were multiple gunshot victims.
Was there anything about the tone of voice or the call itself that let you know that this was something special, something different?
Yes, it just didn't seem right.
So what'd you do?
I was on another call with several other officers. We heard the call come out, and we immediately responded, Code 3, emergency response to the theater.
Is that what Code 3 means, emergency
Yes.
response? Reds and blues?
Yes.
Siren as well, audible?
Yes.
Now, when you're in your vehicle getting there, do you ride with another officer or are you by yourself?
I was riding solo that night.
I want to ask you to take a look at People's Exhibit 4740. I'm sorry? 4740? Your Honor, with the court's permission, can I publish that?
Yes, 4740 may be published.
Okay. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
Talk us through where you went with your vehicle when you showed up.
It's actually out of view a little bit.
How about, with the court's permission, 4741?
Okay?
Okay. I came in.
Do me a favor. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Would you grab the microphone and use our special pointer? And talk us through where you went. And along the way, I'll ask you what you saw, okay? Go ahead.
Okay. So I came in from East Alameda Avenue, which is up here. Came on and off of Crystal. I drove along the Ring Road inside the Aurora Mall. This is the Aurora Mall here. I stopped about here on the Ring Road. This is the theater here. And this is where I stopped with my patrol car, approximately right here.
Why'd you stop there?
Because there was people, the front of the movie theater was very chaotic. There was people running everywhere, and cars were trying to leave, and that was as far as I could get to with my patrol car.
When your patrol car got there, where were you in terms of the order of arrival? Were there a lot of emergency vehicles there already, or were you pretty quick?
I was there fairly quick, but I think there's, a lot of units had arrived before I had as well.
When you got there to that part of the theater, did you know what it was you were supposed to do or what you were going to be encountering?
I had no idea what I was going to encounter.
So talk us through that. What did you end up doing?
I immediately got on my patrol car and several people started yelling at me that there was a male that was shot, and they directed me over to the sidewalk along the ring road, approximately probably 20 feet in front of where I parked with my car, and I encountered my first gunshot victim.
All right, now, when you encountered that gunshot victim, was there anyone with that person at the time?
I don't recall. There were several people that were saying this guy's shot, he needs help. I don't know if anybody was directly with, standing with him or not.
Let me ask you this. In a typical case where you would be called out to a single gunshot victim, would you have spent more time documenting the identity of the person, what they looked like, their injuries, that sort of thing?
Absolutely, I would.
Were you able to do that here this night?
It was almost immediately apparent to me from the traffic on the radio. We had more gunshot victims than I have ever encountered in my career.
So this particular one that I'm going to ask you about, do you to this day know that person's identity?
I know his first name is Kerry.
How do you know that?
Because we asked him what his name was, and he said, "My name's Kerry."
You said we. Who's with you?
Officer Marker.
And did Officer Marker arrive there a different vehicle?
He did.
Now, you get sent over to see this first gunshot victim. Could you tell where the injury was?
Yes.
Where was it?
He had a gunshot wound to his thigh on his right leg.
I don't want this to sound trite, but how bad was it?
To me, it looked pretty bad. I'm not a physician, but it was bleeding profusely, and it appeared he needed immediate medical attention.
So what did you do?
I first applied pressure to his wound.
Using what?
My hands. I observed somebody had tied a belt around his leg prior to my arrival.
Like a tourniquet?
Yes, and they were trying to use it as a tourniquet. It wasn't on there tight enough. I tried to tighten that up. Kerry was in a lot of pain. I told him, he acted like he wanted to punch me. I said, "Go ahead if you need to, man, I got to do this."
Did he?
No, but he was in a lot of pain.
How long did you work with him outside of your vehicle before you guys decided to transport him?
Not very long. I called for rescue, and like I said, the radio traffic, they were saying there were victims all over the place, and the amount of people coming in vehicles trying to leave, and how chaotic the scene was, I knew that we needed to get him transported on our own. There was no way an ambulance or fire was going to be able to find us in this chaotic mess.
Are there lights and sirens going off all around the theater?
There were.
So what did you and Officer Marker decide to do?
Officer Marker, I said, "Let's get him in my car." So Officer Marker assisted me. We put him in the back of the car. At the time, I didn't know Officer Marker stayed in the back of my car. I just started driving to the hospital, and I heard people talking in the back, and I realized Officer Marker was in the back of my car with the victim, Kerry.
And how was this person you know as Kerry doing back there?
Officer Marker was talking to him, trying to keep him calm, but he was in a lot of pain, and we were just trying to get him to the hospital as quickly as we could.
What hospital?
I drove to the Medical Center of Aurora.
And between this place that you've indicated on 4741 and that hospital, describe for us your driving.
So I was able to get out on the ring road down to Exposition to exit the mall. I got on Exposition, went over to Sable, southbound on Sable to Mississippi, westbound on Mississippi to Potomac, and southbound on Potomac to the Medical Center of Aurora.
Fast?
Yes, at a very high rate of speed.
How long did it take you to get there?
I'm approximating 3 to 4 minutes.
How long did it take you once you got to the Medical Center of Aurora to, for lack of a better term, unload Kerry?
I drove to the rear ambulance bay area where they load people into the hospital. I entered the hospital and said, "We have a gunshot victim and expect a lot more from the sounds of what's going on."
When you got there, did you notice, did it seem to you like other gunshot victims had already been there from this incident, or were you the first?
From the reaction from the hospital, I was the first to the medical center, or for the Medical Center of Aurora.
Is that where your evening ended? Was you dropping Kerry off there?
No, it wasn't.
How many more trips did you make to the theater and back with injured victims?
After dropping Kerry off, I made 2 more trips to the hospital with victims.
All right, now, in describing those trips, bless you, in describing those trips, are you going to be describing for us you going any other different directions? And the reason I ask is if not, I'm going to let you sit down. You tell me.
Yeah, I did go different directions.
Then I'm sorry. Tell us about coming back for trip number 2. Tell us what you did.
Again, I wasn't fully aware at the time what the magnitude of this incident was and how many victims we had. So I kind of went back to the same, approximately the same location where I came last time. I came back on Ring Road, and I saw there was a fire truck about here with an ambulance, and they had several people on the ground that they were, that the medical, the fire and ambulance crews were tending to along this little road here, just north and west of the theater.
Where's Marker?
Marker's still with me in the car.
Is he sitting in the front now?
Yeah, he's sitting in the front seat with me now.
What's the back seat look like?
I hadn't looked at the back seat yet.
Are you covered with blood?
At this point in time, I don't know.
How about Marker?
I'm not sure.
What's your focus?
Our focus is just get people to the hospital as quickly as possible.
So tell us what the next thing you did is.
So we contacted the ambulance crew and the fire crew, which was right here. We said, who needs to go? They said these 2 guys need to go. One guy had a apparent gunshot wound to the head. It was wrapped. His head was wrapped with gauze. I'm not sure on the other part. I don't remember.
Were they conscious?
They were conscious and able. We were able to walk them to the our patrol car from where they were on the ground. But there was a lot of blood.
Did you put them in the back seat?
We put them in the back seat.
And then what?
I took the same route back to the Medical Center of Aurora. So I went out Ring Road, down to Exposition, over to Sable, and down to Mississippi and back to the hospital.
In between that first time you were there and this second time as you're leaving, is the scene different in any remarkable way?
No.
Still chaotic?
Yes.
Okay. Anything that you recall about that trip that you took from this second time at the theater to Aurora Hospital?
No, we just got to the hospital as quickly as we could. Officer Marker, then we both helped escort the 2 male victims into the emergency room at the Medical Center Aurora, and then we again jumped back in our patrol car and headed back to the theater.
On the trip back to the hospital this second time, what are the 2 victims in the car with you doing or saying, or you're saying to them?
Nothing that I can recall.
Are you getting more dispatch air call over the radio and stuff?
Still trying to listen to the radio, but I didn't know what was going on at the theater at this point still. There was a lot of radio traffic, and I just know it was the officers on scene were just calling more and more victims out. So I didn't know how many people were injured. It didn't sound good, though.
Based on your description, I mean, is a lot of what you're doing here just you're kind of freestyling, your own initiative, trying to get people here, there, and everywhere?
This is like nothing I've ever seen before. Yeah, it was just, we were trying to get people the medical attention they needed.
So you drop off these 2 guys at
Yes.
the hospital. What did you do?
Got back in our patrol car and headed back towards the theater. While en route back to the theater, Sergeant Butler got on the radio and said, we need more cars still at behind the theater, behind auditorium number 9. He goes, we got critical gunshot wound patients that need to get to the hospital.
Before I move to that next group, did you get the names of the 2 guys, the one with the head wound and the other one?
I never did.
Yeah. So where did you park this third time? Talk us through your
So this
third
third time, so I'm coming up Sable again, and so this is the back of the theater. I ended up, there's a lot of construction going on in Sable at this point in time. Drove across the construction, drove up the grass embankment. It was the quickest way I could find, because I had been to the front. I'd seen how much was blocked in the front of the theater. The best idea I had was to drive up the grass and into the back of the theater over the embankment.
What
That's
did you
how we
see
got there.
back there when you got to the back of the theater?
I saw there was one fire truck parked in the back. And other than that, when I pulled up, Sergeant Butler said, stay in your car, don't even get out. And at that point in time,
And he's saying that to you over the radio?
No, he was, at this point in time, I was in contact. He came up to my patrol car, and Sergeant Bartlett said, stay in your car. We're going to load your car with some more gunshot victims.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the chance to sit down again if you give the right answer. Is there anything else you need to describe about
Just my exit. Once the victims were loaded in my car, I drove back over the grass embankment and went northbound on Sable, because I was told to go to University Hospital.
Go ahead and have a seat, sir, if you would. Let me ask you about, while you sit down, the Sergeant Butler comes up to your car, tells you stay in there, we're just loading people in. Was Marker still with you in that car?
Marker was still seated in the front seat of my patrol car.
Who got loaded into the back of your car?
A adult female and adult male gunshot victims.
How do you know they're gunshot victims?
They were bleeding very bad.
You remember from where?
To the best of my recollection, I don't remember the male as much. He was on the rear passenger side. The females who I saw, because I helped get her out of the patrol car at University Hospital. And I honestly don't know where she was shot, but her chest area and arms were completely saturated in blood.
Any conversations with them on the way to the hospital?
No.
Were they making any noises, saying anything?
They were in extreme pain. Every bump in the road, and I was driving at high rate of speed again. The brakes at this point in my patrol car were very hot, and it was hard to stop at times. But again, I was just trying to get them to the hospital as fast as I could because I didn't know how critical they were.
That driving that you've been describing to us, you ever done anything quite like that before?
This whole call was something I could say I'd never done before. Making that many trips to the hospital like that, I would say no, I've never driven like that, and I was just trying to get the people the help they needed.
When you got them to the hospital, you said you helped the lady out from behind you. Did Officer Marker or someone else take care of the gentleman behind?
I know Officer Marker and how I helped get the victims out. I wasn't paying so much attention to what Officer Marker was doing as when we showed up at University Hospital, talk about another chaotic scene, there were patrol cars just packed behind the emergency room. They had security guards from the hospital bring gurneys out from the hospital because the hospital staff was just overwhelmed. So the security guards were bringing gurneys out of the emergency room, and we were helping load them onto the hospital beds or gurneys. And
did you get sent back to the theater after that?
well, I did go back to the theater. So the female victim that I helped out, you're asking about her injuries. I just remember she was in a lot of pain, and I had to get her out of the car. I didn't have anybody else there to assist me to get her out of the car, so she put her arm around my neck. I got her out of the car, and she was screaming in pain. And at that point, the security guard heard her yelling, I think, and came over and helped me get her onto a hospital bed and pushed her in the hospital. But she, like I said, she was in severe pain, and she was bleeding pretty bad, but I don't know exactly from where.
Best guess is you didn't get names of those two folks either?
No.
Don't know who they are to this day?
I still do not know who they are.
What happened next?
Me and Officer Marker went back to the theater.
Any more victims for you to take care of there?
When we arrived back at the theater this time, about the time we arrived back at, somebody on the radio said, all the critical gunshot wound patients had already been transferred to the hospital. That was the most law enforcement I've ever seen in my life around that theater. Jurisdictions that I didn't even know were close enough to arrive at that theater were there. And we were told we weren't really necessarily needed at the theater anymore, and they asked for more officers to head to University Hospital to provide security at the emergency room.
Is that where you went?
And then I drove, Officer Marker got out and went back to locate his vehicle, and I drove back to the hospital.
If you had to estimate for us the amount of time that elapsed from the time you first contacted that man named Kerry until you got to the hospital the third time with those last two folks. Do you have a sense of how long that was, how much time had elapsed?
I hadn't really thought about that before. 20, 25 minutes maybe. That would be my best guess.
I have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Nothing further. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Brady, any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. The jury doesn't seem to have any questions, so may this witness be released from his subpoena, Mr. Brockler?
May, Your Honor.
Any objection? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Call your next witness, please. You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names?
It's Marcus Jerome Weaver, M-A-R-C-U-S, J-E-R-O-M-E, W-E-A-V-E-R.
Ms. Tish McGuire, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Weaver, were you at the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado on July 19th of 2012?
Yes, ma'am.
And did that go into the early morning of July 20th of 2012?
Yes, ma'am.
Thinking back to that day of July 19th, 2012, what do you remember about that day before going to the movie theater?
I met a friend by the name of Rebecca Ringo about a month prior, and she was really excited about learning more about Batman, so I brought over a couple movies. Me and her two daughters watched them, and she was very excited about going to the movies. So that morning of the 19th, she reminded me about getting the tickets to go to the midnight premiere because I had the week off for my job. And so around lunchtime, I got another phone call from her and said, "Did you remember to get the tickets?" And I said, "No." And so I went over to the movie theater at that point, and not only got tickets for the midnight premiere, but I knew I would like it so much, I got tickets for the next day too.
So after you did that, what time did you and Rebecca plan to meet up to go see the movie?
Well, Rebecca just recently got a new job for a medical supply company, and so she got off about 10:30, and just like Rebecca, she gave someone a ride home. So the plan was to meet at the movie theater about 11:45 before the movie started. That way we can get hot dogs and all that kind of stuff. So I went and got the tickets about 6 and then came back, I would say about 10:30 to make sure I could get the best seat I could.
Right, and do you recall where you parked when you got to the movie theater?
Parked my car?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really recall where I parked at, but I know I drove to the theater myself.
Okay. And what did you do when you got to the movie theater at 10:30?
It was kind of a madhouse. There was people dressed up in Batman costumes. There was just a lot of kids there because it was in the summertime. Just everybody was in this festive mood. Usually the first thing you notice when you walk into the Aurora Theater is you have some police officers there. They weren't present. So it's just a lot of people everywhere. And so I went into the theater. I went into through the lobby, gave the guy my ticket for Theater 9, and walked through the doors, went up to the right side, and not the left, and looked over, saw my friend Kaylin Bailey and two of her friends I thought were her friends, and didn't want to say hi to her because I didn't want to embarrass her. And so I ended up getting seats about 2 or 3 rows behind her in the middle, and I thought at the time they were the best seats, so I put down my red Butts Warehouse sweatshirt right there to hold my seat, and then proceeded to go outside and wait for Rebecca's arrival.
Now I want to ask you about a couple things you just said. So one was that it seemed to me that you said you had experience going to this theater.
I've been to the theater plenty of times. It's $5. It's pretty cheap.
Is it in close proximity to where you lived at the time?
At the time, about 2 miles away.
And then you said that you recall there being a lot of children there. Did you ever have an opportunity to see those children in the lobby area, the concession area?
They were pretty much everywhere. I mean, a bunch of teenagers, just all different kind of ages, sizes, shapes. Everybody was excited about this movie.
Now, do you remember what theater number you went into?
It was Theater 9.
And then you said once you got in there, how'd you go about choosing your seats?
Well, I mean, I wanted to sit somewhere in the middle, so I don't really see that well, and I knew I was going to like the movie, so went up about 5 steps, it seems, 5 or 6, and it was a spot right open right in the middle, and so I put my Bud's Warehouse sweatshirt, red sweatshirt right there, and it saved both spots. So.
And you said you ran into your friend Keelan Bailey.
Yeah, she was sitting, I guess about 2 or 3 rows up, and she looked like she was having a good time. So I didn't want to bother her or bug her or act like, hey, Kaylin, in front of her friends. So I didn't.
And how did you know her?
I know her from church. I've known her since she was about 10 years old. Her grandmother cooked food at the church in the city, and we all served on the Wednesday night team, and that's where we serve food to the homeless, and we treat them, like a restaurant. And that's also where I met my wife and son Mitchell.
Now, you said she was seated about 3 rows up. Does that mean like 3 rows in front of you in the theater?
3 rows in front of me in the stadium, 3 rows in front of me in the stadium seating.
So after you put your sweatshirt on these seats, what'd you go do?
Just went back in the lobby. I went back outside. Went out and smoked a cigarette. I smoked then, and I just waited. Probably smoked like 2 or 3 cigarettes waiting. And I kept calling her, and I was like, "Where you at? It's ready to go." So, because I was getting excited about the movies. I get anxious a little bit about seeing Batman, so.
Anxious, excited?
Very excited, very excited.
And you said you were waiting for her. Was that Rebecca Wingo that you were waiting for
Yes,
outside?
ma'am.
So did Rebecca show up?
She did show up. Of course, I'm like, "You're always late." And so we laughed about that. And then she said she was hungry. And so we proceeded to go inside the theater. She had parked on the right side. She had a Subaru, so she parked over there. And then we went inside the movie theater, handed over the tickets. I had been in and out so much, the guy knew who I was, so I didn't need my ticket, and went through the concession line. She wanted a hot dog, and soda, and some popcorn, and I said, of course, She's like, I'll pay you back when I get paid, and I was like, no problem. And so we went inside the theater, and we got our seats in anticipation of the movie.
Now, what'd you do while you were waiting for the movie to begin?
Just had a small chit-chat conversation. I can't remember anything, but she asked me, was I getting sick of her? And I said, how could I get sick of you? You're pretty cool. And just chit-chat about her kids and, things of that nature. Nothing big about what happened at work and stuff like that. No, nothing major.
Do you remember anything unusual happening at all before the movie began?
It just was a lot of people. It was a lot of just movement. It was a lot of just people everywhere, and so it's just kind of chaotic in that sort of sense. But everybody was just really, 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 really excited. I mean, when the previews came on, people were clapping, so that's how festive it was.
Now, at that time, how full would you describe the theater being?
Well, when I set my sweatshirt down, luckily it was probably maybe like 3/4, I would say half to 3/4 full. And so that's why I was really excited about our seats, because I was like, wow, what a score, which I thought at the time. And so it was just starting to get bigger and bigger and bigger. They had started to open up. It got so big, so many people wanted to see the movie that they started to open up other theaters. And so my thought was maybe I should move to another theater, but I didn't. And
so was almost every seat full in your theater?
Yes, ma'am. Once the movie started, and we sat back in our seats before it started, you could see that every seat was filled and people were just excited, and we were looking forward to the movie.
Do you recall if there were previews before the movie?
Yes, ma'am.
And then at some point in time, did Batman begin?
Yeah, Batman began, and everybody started clapping. We were all excited. It started with the part where I guess I forget the main mean character. I forget his name. And he was in an airplane, and that's what started the movie. And then it went further on to where Alfred was talking to Bruce Wayne about not being Batman anymore.
And then what happened?
And then all of a sudden, just from out of the blue, there was as you're looking at the screen, and I was right in the center, and she was on my right side, and I was on the left, and as you look at the screen on the right side, it seemed like there was some type of bomb that was right across the bottom row, and we're sitting here in the 5th row right here, and I just recall, I just looked over to Rebecca, and this was one of the last things I said to her. I said, I can't believe someone's lighting off a smoke bomb. Then I had to consider that we had, a lot of kids there maybe playing a prank. We didn't have fireworks that year, and so I can understand why someone would do that. And sometimes you go to a Rocky Horror film, and they do pranks and things like that, and people were dressed up, and so, I really thought it was just a joke.
And just to be clear for the record, when you said, about the 5th row up, you're talking about 5th row up in the stadium section of
Yes, ma'am.
the theater. So after you see this, what you think is a smoke bomb going across the theater, what do you remember happening after that?
Well, the smoke came across the movie, so you couldn't see the screen, and it just, everybody was just in a state of just like disbelief that this would happen, and so really didn't know what to do. But the thing that sticks in my mind, and the thing that I'll never forget as long as I live, is a person came out on the right side, and it seemed like there was 2 shots fired at the roof, and the roof came down, and then all of a sudden, you just hear this thunderous noise. I mean, it was so loud that like it was hurting your ears and would shake your body, and so you would see just the white silhouette of, his gun, and this white flash that was like this wide, and you could see the silhouette of the shooter, and it looked like he had a football helmet on, looked like he had some gear on, but he was doing a motion like this, and the white light just kept moving and moving and moving and moving and moving and moving, and finally, I think after maybe the 10th shot, I got Rebecca down, and myself down on the ground, and the seats that were, that it wasn't that big, and at the time I didn't have a beach body, so I thought for sure I was going to get hit.
All right. With the court's permission, Your Honor, Mr. Weaver was just demonstrating with his hands, and he was making a motion that with both of his hands outstretched, going from right to left and going back from right to left, and I'd like the record to reflect that. And if I could have a moment, Your Honor. Yeah. And so what I would like to do with the court's permission is ask Mr. Weaver to step down to be able to make that motion in an area right here where the jury would be able to see him.
Well, I think the jury can see him from right there. So if you just stand up and do that motion, that's fine. You can do it from right there, okay?
Okay.
Right, so if you could just stand up, Mr. Weaver, where you're seated, and if you could just repeat that motion and describe for the jury what you believe the shooter was doing.
Well, what he did was he walked in.
Here, why don't you grab the microphone right here, this one,
this one?
the handheld. Turn it on. There you go.
Mic check. All right. So what happened was when he walked into the theater on the right-hand side, you could see this big this light, and he just kept firing, but you could see him moving this way and that way and moving this way and that way, and so the light would move with it, but the noise remained the same, just boom, boom, just like thunder. It would shake your body, and so as I was sitting on the ground, I could see through the crack of the seat what was going on and still see a silhouette. So.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weaver. And when you did that, the first time you were using 2 hands, and this time you were holding a mic in one hand. And so just for the record to be cleared, what do you recall the shooter having? Did he have 1 hand or do you have 2 hands?
Well, it's hard to say but the gun was so loud, it appeared that it was a large weapon, not a small weapon. So I assumed that he was just shooting and going, I'll use the mic as the gun.
And if the record will reflect that Mr. Weaver is holding the microphone with his right hand in front of his left hand, and he has 2 hands on the microphone, which he's demonstrating if that were a weapon. Thank you very much, Mr. Weaver. You may have a seat. So and you had also talked to the jury about the fact that you said it seemed like she had shot up into the ceiling and that the ceiling was coming down. Can you describe what you're talking about when you're seeing the ceiling coming down?
Well, with the smoke going on and movies still going on, it seems as if there was 2 shots or some shots that were fired at the ceiling, and it looked like some things came down from the ceiling, and it just was all weird. And then all of a sudden, the gunfire started, and then the white light and all that from the corner, and so it was very. At first, it was hard to grasp my head around what was going on, and so once people started screaming and getting hit, it became from a a surreal situation to a dangerous situation. So it warranted me to get down on the ground and get Rebecca down on the ground as well.
So is that what you did, in fact? Did you get down on the ground, and did you get Rebecca down on the ground?
Yes, I just sure did.
And could you describe for the jury how you got both of you down on the ground?
I just pushed her down and pushed me down too, and we were just sitting right there, and she wasn't moving, but I could see him through the crack of the seat, and the seat was only this big in front of us. And so my main concern at the time was Rebecca, the fact that she wasn't moving, and, you know, the safety of others around me. I wasn't really concerned about my own safety.
And Mr. Weaver, you had just demonstrated two things, the crack that was in front of you, and then you also said the seat that was, you know, up above you.
Hmm.
How approximately long or short would you say that crack was in front of that you were looking out of?
I'll say that crack's about this big right here.
Would you estimate that to be an inch, 2 inch? What do you think?
It's hard to say, but maybe an inch to 2 inches.
And you kept trying to peek through that.
That was the only way I could see the shooter. I looked through there, and then as soon as he started shooting, I would put my head down, and then I would see him for a while, and then it would just get so loud that you would just put your head down and hope that like it didn't hit you, but you could hear it hitting objects. You could hear it whizzing by your head. You can hear it, the bullets just, people screaming, people saying, "I've been shot, I'm hurt," you know, and just not being able to do anything because you don't really know where the bullets are, you know, coming from or that kind of deal from the shooter.
What are you thinking during this time?
You know, like I was thinking about Rebecca and her well-being and seeing if she was okay, but she wasn't moving. Just thinking about everybody around me. I mean, people were, at the time were coming down the middle and stepping on my back, and, you know, my face is grounded with, you know, nasty sludge from the floor, and still looking through the corner of the seat every time the shooter would fire from that corner. And you could see he had some type of helmet on, some type of gear with the flash. And you could see him pretty clearly, but the only thing you couldn't do is see his face.
And why was that?
Because of the distance, it was really basically from here to that corner over there. I would say that's how far he was away. And so...
I'm going to stop you for 1 second, Mr. Weaver. The record can reflect that Mr. Weaver just pointed to the corner in the room. Are you talking about the far corner? Apologize. Are you talking about the farthest corner in the room?
I would say that farthest corner of the room, if I was sitting in the theater, distance-wise, I would say.
That's about how far you were away from the shooter?
From him, mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Your Honor.
So is that about 20 feet, would you say?
A little bit longer than that. I mean, I'm not it's hard to say, but he was in the corner, and where he came in, we were in the 5th row, and their stadium is about, 6 or 7 rows, so I would say maybe 80 to 100 feet.
So you said Rebecca wasn't moving. Had you tried to talk to Rebecca at all? Had you had any communications with her at that point?
Well, at that time, I was just more concerned that she didn't get hit by bullets, or I didn't get hit by bullets, and so I was trying to protect both of us at the same time, but looking at the shooter at the same time, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of all this chaos and all these things that were going on, this voice in my head said that he was going to stop shooting, and when he stopped shooting, you leave the theater. And so at first I was just like, there's no way I'm getting up and I'm going to be able to move. And so I was just sitting there, and then all of a sudden, I would say about 20 to 30 seconds later, he just stopped shooting. And so that was my cue to get up and try to get out of the theater. So I grabbed Rebecca, picked her up. There were people coming down the middle. They were coming down the rows. It seemed like it was time for a max exodus for all the people who were, behind the seats, hiding or had someone injured. And so I tried to pick her up with my left-hand side, and people just knocked me over, and she fell right back into the same seat that she was in. And then I fell over and hurt my knees pretty bad and my foot. But most importantly, I just wanted to get out of the theater. And during this melee of just these people going everywhere, all of a sudden there was a different noise that came up, and it sounded as if it was a different type of gun, not the same gun as the rifle that was firing all the shots.
And what did that gun sound like to you?
It was just more like a boom, boom, as opposed to the thunderous noise. It was just more like boom, boom. It was definitely distinct from the other gun. There was 2 differences of the gun.
Now, you said that you had fallen pretty bad. Could you describe for the jury how you had fallen?
Well, we're in the 5th row, and so when people start rushing us, she fell right back, and I kind of crisscrossed over the bottom seats all the way almost to the corner But once again, he started shooting again once everybody started coming down. And so I was just, the things that I saw and the people that were hurt as I was exiting the other side of the theater, not the right side, but the left side. People was crawling to the exits. Some guy was shot in his hand. It was just a pretty horrific scene, but I figured if I could go out, make it out of the theater, then I could tell a police officer to come in, or maybe the police were on their way. And so that was my mindset at that time.
Now, did you attempt to bring Rebecca out with you, or how did you end up leaving?
I totally attempt to pick her up. Obviously, she was pretty heavy, and she wasn't moving at all or lifeless, but as a believer, I just had hope that she might be still alive, or something may happen. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't get her out of the theater because there were bodies coming down. I mean, there was people walking down. There was bodies in the row. It just made it difficult, and being knocked over didn't help it at all either.
And could you describe, were you knocked over into your row, or were you knocked over like rows in front of you?
I was knocked over rows in front of me and went this way. And so it was just, once those gunshots started going off again, it just raised a level of anxiety I never felt before, and I just was in a panic and just wanted to get out of that theater, and I knew if I could make it out of that theater, then I could get Rebecca some help.
So how did you end up exiting the theater?
Well, I obviously got my bearings, and then I went out that left side of the theater door, went and got into the lobby, and once I got in the lobby, there was other movie theaters converging towards the door, towards the front, and so it's this mass exodus. As officers were coming in, we were coming out, and there were people crawling towards the door, people that were hurt, people just didn't know what to do, and as I made it outside, I told the police officer my friend Rebecca was in there and she needed some help, and he said, we'll take care of it. And so I went outside, and I was standing there in the parking lot where, over hundreds of people were sitting out there crying, not knowing what's really going on. And so, the first thing you do as a kid is you call your mom. So I called my mom, then I called a roommate friend, and they didn't want to come pick me up because they said I shouldn't have been at the movies anyway. And so then I called a coworker, and he didn't answer because it was so early. My mom didn't either because it was so early. And so at that time, this little girl comes up to me and says, your arm's bleeding. And I said, what are you talking about? And I looked over at my arm, and sure enough, it was bleeding all over my shirt. And so I lifted up, and there was little bullet holes right there. And I lifted up my shoulder.
Stop you for 1 second. If the
Okay.
record could reflect that Mr. Weaver just pointed to his right shoulder and pointed that there were 2 bullet holes in his right shoulder. Thank you. So after you had noticed that, you pulled up your shirt, you saw 2 bullet holes.
Mm-hmm. And it was just blood just streaming down my arm. And so at that point, I went over to talk to the police officer again and told him that, that I was shot. And he said, well, you need to get to the hospital. We can't tell the wounds came out. But I said, I'm not leaving until I find out what's going on with my friend Rebecca. And they said they promised me that everybody would be evacuated a few times. And so I just went over to one of the ambulances, and they took me to, I think it's Parker Adventist Hospital. And so that's what basically happened after that.
Your Honor, if I may approach Mr. Weaver with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1177.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Weaver, do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
What is that?
It's a diagram of Theater 9.
All right, and do you recognize the handwriting on that diagram?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, whose handwriting is it?
That's mine.
All right, and what does that diagram depict?
It depicts how I entered the theater, how I was in the theater while the movie was going on, and how I exited, and also where Kaylin was sitting and where Rebecca was sitting.
All right, and did you draw everything on that diagram?
Yes, ma'am.
Does it fairly and accurately represent what you believed happened in the theater on July 20th of 2012?
100%. Yes, ma'am.
Now there's some markers in front of you, Mr. Weaver. If you could please print your name and sign your name and put today's date on that diagram. I believe today is the 29th.
Do I need to put the year?
Please. Thank you. Your Honor, at this time I would move for admission of that exhibit.
Any objection to 1177? No. All right, without objection, 1177 is admitted.
Thank you, Your
It
Honor.
may be published.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Weaver, I'm going to ask you a favor. I'm going to ask you to get that cordless microphone again. And I'm going to ask you to grab that pointer stick that's behind you. And you're going to see your diagram pop up on the screen here. If you could please show the jury, first of all, how you came into the theater.
Okay. So I was by myself at first, and so when I came in through, let me see, this way right here. And then I went up these steps, and then I saw Kaylin right here. Didn't want to bother her, and then I went up to the rows, and there it was, the stream spot right here. And so I put my coat down there, and then I went back out this way and went outside and waited for Rebecca. And then when we both came back in with our food, went back up, excited about the seats. Everybody started cheering.
And
the
who
movie
was seated
started.
where, if you could tell the jury?
Oh, sorry. Rebecca's seat was, she was on the right side, and I was on the left.
Okay, thanks. And then what does that diagram also depict, where you saw that, like what you said was a smoke bomb earlier? Is that depicted
Sure.
on that diagram?
About 10 minutes into the movie, like I said, when Alfred was talking to Bruce Wayne, there was a type sound, and it seemed like it was a canister, but it was smoke was emanating out of it, and it went all the way over through here and then hit the wall, and then it seems like the smoke just started coming across. And then that's when I heard it seemed like what I had heard was 2 shots that hit the roof, and there was some stuff that came down from the roof. Then all of a sudden, that's when the gunman opened fire with his gun and just was moving right to left from this angle right here. Yep, it looks like he entered the door there and just started shooting.
Then you also have notated on there some white flashes. Is that where the area where you saw the white
Yes,
flashes?
it was all right here. It was like he was positioned here, so there was no way that you can actually get to him. It was almost he barricaded himself.
What's the objection? All right, you're talking about your observations only, okay? So do not speculate about anything. All right, so ask the question again, Ms. Tish McGuire.
Sure. The area there that you saw the white flashes, do you recall where that is?
It's this area right here.
Okay. And then where's the area where you saw the silhouette of the shooter?
It's right here too. Same place.
And where's the area where you had described for the jury about what you saw the shooter kind of going from right to left and left to right?
Same area, because we had sat down in the seat the first wave of bullets that went through, because we just couldn't wrap our heads around that actually someone will be in the movie theater shooting at an unarmed crowd.
And by the way, the objection by Ms. Spengler is sustained. Sorry, I should have said that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Weaver, can you use the pointer to show the jury how it was where you kind of fell over and describe for them how that happened?
Okay. So once he started shooting, we realized that it wasn't a prank. We both got down on the ground right here, and she wasn't moving. And that's when that voice in my head said that, you should, when he stopped shooting, you get up and move to the theater. And then all of a sudden, he stopped for longer than the normal interval, which was about 2 seconds before all over. And luckily, I ended up on this side, so I was able to exit the theater. And that's when I saw all this stuff coming through. And as I exited out here into the lobby, people were just converging to the doors, and the police officers were coming in at the same time.
All right, thank you very much. You may have a seat. Thank you, Mr. Weaver. So I think we were at the place where you had told us that you had gotten to the hospital.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you could tell us what happened when you got to the hospital.
Well, when I got to the hospital, there wasn't a lot of people there. It was kind of farther out, Park of Venice. It wasn't one of the busier ones. And so they were able to give me some immediate treatment. They took me into the x-ray room to see where the bullets were that were lodged in my arm. And so a detective came and asked me some questions. The TV was on. People were just asking about what happened, and I was getting phone calls from different folks. And so all these things were going on, and the doctor finally told me that the bullets, the pellets that were in my arm shrapnel, whatever it was.